Hello, and welcome to Matter of Fact, a podcast from the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center, where we report what matters. I'm your host, Hilawe Tibebe. With support from the Scripps Howard Foundation, our center works to counter misinformation and strengthen truth-based journalism across communities in Southeast Mississippi. Today's episode highlights the RACJC news story, From Trust to Trafficking. Mississippi survivor shares story of being an invisible victim. This episode examines how human trafficking can exist in plain sight, built on trust, manipulation, and silence, and how survivors often go unseen despite systems in place to protect them. Through one Mississippi survivor story, we explore the warning signs of trafficking, the barriers victims face when seeking help, and the role journalism plays in making invisible crimes visible. As we dive deeper into the story, we'll talk with the reporter Morgan Gill about her reporting process, and we'll close with a conversation with Walker Scott, the media literacy coordinator, to discuss how audiences can recognize misinformation around the issue. First, before we begin, a quick warning for our listeners that today's interviews talk about various themes including trauma and assault. Viewer discretion is advised. Every year, thousands of Americans become victims of human trafficking. Looking into the data, the National Human Trafficking Hotline cites nearly 3,500 reports since its inception in 2007. Mississippi is not immune. In the state, these numbers are more than abstract statistics. They're seen through the stories of victims like Amber Eide. Fresh out of high school, she met someone she believed was forming a genuine relationship with, someone she trusted. That trust became the gateway into exploitation that would go on for years. Amber describes how her trafficking began with an ordinary everyday encounter.
I was young. I left home. I just graduated high school. Um, I was in my high school year and I met this man. He was like significantly older than me, very much older than me. I met him at a grocery store, like a normal anybody would meet at grocery stores. I met him there, and then just from there, it just began. I eventually left my home with my parents, and I just, that's where we met at the grocery store.
And from that day, ID recalls a combination of what she calls manipulation tactics that were used to coerce her throughout the years.
Mind games, a lot of mind games. So to mind games to make you physically want to cooperate, so it's a lot of love bombing in the beginning, but the love eventually wears off and people have blinders and your blinders will come off and you can see the real person. So I eventually saw who he was, but it took many, many years to see, and take the layers back. Someone who, like planned, very much planned, to do what they wanted to do with my life.
ID describes her trafficker taking her away from everything she once knew, leaving her vulnerable in an unfamiliar environment.
But no, I didn't know his plans. And I was young. Like I thought it was all about love, but it truly wasn't. So it took me away from my family, took me out of Mississippi, went to Atlanta. And then when I was in Atlanta, that's when, it started.
ID says looking back now, she can identify the warning signs that she may have glanced over when she was younger. She describes different factors at the time that distracted her from what was actually happening.
No, I mean, I'm sure red flags were all over, but I just ignored them. I was young. I was 18, 19, literally left high school. And then not only that, though, I was pregnant, and so I had a baby in the middle of all of it. So I really didn't start getting trafficked until after I had my child. I remember my child, being on the motel bed the day that I got trafficked. And so it didn't just, it wasn't abusive, it wasn't forcible, it was coercible. So I was coerced into doing things, the unthinkable things.
Stories like ID's highlight a gap in what people think human trafficking looks like, and what it actually is. She believes misconstrued narratives people see on TV plays a role, and she hopes her story will help offset those assumptions.
Human trafficking, people believe this narrative that it's just like overseas, it's, all of the human trafficking is right in your own house. It's right in your own backyard. It's your own friends. You don't even know it. Probably friends at your school right now are being trafficked. It doesn't have like a visible, ooh, she's trafficked. Ooh, she's trafficked.
The executive director of the Mississippi Coalition Against Human Trafficking, Amanda Dollar, says that sensationalism can make it harder for real victims to get help.
There's so many sensationalized stories oftentimes on social media and just kind of shared of, the whole white van in the grocery store parking lot, or someone following someone around in the store. Parents are afraid that their children might get snatched up, or their, kids might get snatched up. And not to say that people should not be safe and watchful and aware. We always want to reiterate that, because there are bad things that happen in this world, and children do get kidnapped. Bad things do happen. You can get, mugged, assaulted, or whatever in a grocery store. So always be aware of your surroundings, and teach your kids about, stranger danger. But it's so important when it comes to human trafficking. I have worked literally with probably hundreds of people over the last few years, survivors of human trafficking, working with law enforcement, child protective services. And I don't know of a time, I don't believe I've ever been told about a situation where someone was just going about their day and they were snatched up in a parking lot and then they were trafficked. So traffickers actually build a relationship typically with the person who will then become their victim. So it happens through social media. It happens through maybe an acquaintance and a friend, but the trafficker will most oftentimes build a trusting relationship with their victim.
The invisibility of human trafficking is brought to light through state data. In 2024 alone, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received 300 tips from Mississippi, and law enforcement identified 195 cases involving nearly 300 victims. These reports came from all 82 counties, highlighting that trafficking isn't just an urban problem, it's statewide. In an effort to combat these staggering statistics, Mississippi has taken steps to strengthen protections for survivors and improve how trafficking cases are identified. The state has expanded victim services and invested in specialized training for law enforcement. Today, certified human trafficking investigators are present in most jurisdictions, thanks to the coordinated efforts between the Attorney General's Office, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, and the Center for Violence Prevention. Advocates say that understanding human trafficking in Mississippi means replacing myths with facts. It means seeing the data, the patterns that span through counties, and it means understanding the human stories behind those numbers. Ultimately, experts say education and community awareness remain essential. Recognizing the signs of trafficking, supporting survivors, and holding offenders accountable all depend on an informed public. The story we just discussed was reported by RACJC News reporter Morgan Gill, as well as videographer Samin Chan. Morgan joins us now to talk about how this story came together and what she learned in the process. Morgan, thank you for being here. What first drew you to this survivor story, and why did it feel important to tell it right now?
What drew me to this story was I was actually watching Tubi at home, and they have a lot of human trafficking movies and just abduction movies on there. And I was like, wow, this is pretty interesting. And so I looked more into it after, I watched the movie and stuff, and I realized that it was Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So I thought this would be a great, tie together, and a great time to just do the story.
See, I didn't even know that. So it's not only is it relevant because of the statistics of human trafficking, it's also relevant because it's Human Trafficking Awareness Month.
Yes.
So how did you approach building trust with the survivor while reporting on such a sensitive topic?
Well, first I spoke with someone with the Mississippi Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and she just told me beforehand just a few pointers to do, just, prep her with the questions and just talk to her a little bit. So I did do that, and before the interview, I just let her hear some of the questions, and I told her just whatever she's not comfortable with, she doesn't have to talk about, and yeah, just getting her more comfortable with me and just letting her know that you can share as much as you want and as little as you want.
Was there any questions that you found difficult to ask the character in your story? Or any topics that you were like, I don't know how I'm going to go about this, asking her something that's, so personal to her? And we'll get more into the character.
Yeah, because it was some things that I did want to follow up on that I didn't know how sensitive it was, like when she said she was trafficked right next to her child on the bed in a motel. Like, I did want to follow up with just more questions and more details, but I didn't want to intrude that much, and I did tell her that she can just share as much as she wants to. So if she didn't want to share any other details, so I didn't force or push with that.
And relatively speaking, she had a pretty easy time opening up to you about those topics, right?
Yeah, she definitely did. Especially since I did talk to her beforehand, so she got a little more comfortable.
So with your character, Amber Eide, how did her experience challenge any common assumptions that we may have about what human trafficking looks like?
So I guess some common assumptions is that it looks like movies where, someone is kidnapped by somebody random and they're drugged and goes into prostitution, and they're just basically in the wrong place at the wrong time. But people that actually get trafficked, it's usually by family members or just people that they know or are close to. And, they're just building that trust between each other and then, grooming them over time. And they're, over time, they're ended up coerced into doing things that they don't want to do. So I say those are a few assumptions. It's just that it looks like movies. Looks like what it is on movies.
And I know you talked earlier about your character, Miss Eide, whom you interviewed. She said a couple things that stuck with you, and you mentioned one of them earlier. Was there any other things from what she talked about that made you maybe rethink your own assumptions that you had about human trafficking in the past, or maybe taught you something new?
Yeah, I guess the new thing is I didn't think family members or people closest to you would, do things like that. But I guess it makes sense because you can, build trust easier. And another thing is, when I go back to how it looks like it is on movies, someone with the Mississippi Coalition Against Human Trafficking, she basically said when people do go to court and the jury is made up of community members, some of the cases may be reduced or never even brought to trial because the jury members are thinking it looks like the movies, basically.
Yeah, it looks like what they've been told it looks like.
Yeah, so what could have been human trafficking charges and conviction kind of gets dropped down to promoting prostitution. So
that is a very interesting outlook. So lastly, I want to ask you, how do you think local journalism plays a role in prevention and awareness around trafficking?
I guess shedding a light on what it just actually looks like, going back to what I just previously said, and then just knowing that the average age of recruitment is 12 to 14, and it actually can just happen to anyone. So I really feel like local reporting and local news is just really shedding a light, because a lot of people don't even know what's going on in Mississippi or as prevalent as it is. So I think this was a very important story.
And it's very important because it's usually not understood that this is within our community.
Right. A lot of people do not know that. It's right down the street, and it's been reported in all 82 counties just in the past 5 years that human trafficking is going on. They've got tips and signals from every county.
Yeah. I appreciate you for your reporting and for spreading awareness on an often invisible issue within the state. Now it's time for What is True, our fact-checking segment, where we break down common claims, talk about how to verify them, and give you the tools to spot what's real. Joining us is Walker Scott, our What is True Media Literacy Coordinator. Walker is over our fact-checking investigations and leads the Center's Ask Me What is True community media literacy trainings. Walker, how is human trafficking often misrepresented or oversimplified in the media?
Human trafficking is constantly evolving with technology and with every new case that is reported. It's easy for this crime to be simplified by being stuck in the past or sensationalized by depictions in fictional media. It's important to listen to survivors and learn how it really happens in more nuanced ways than is often portrayed, such as labor exploitation, debt bondage, and domestic servitude.
Why is survivor-centered storytelling important from a media literacy standpoint?
Survivors understand better than anyone the horrors of human trafficking, and without input from survivors, their stories can easily be misrepresented and manipulated, distorting facts in ways that can harm victims and potential victims alike. From a media literacy perspective, this approach helps audiences understand the human reality behind the issue, rather than just abstract or shocking snapshots.
Earlier in the show, we discussed topics like invisibility and trust. How do these themes show up in misinformation or public misunderstanding?
Invisibility and trust are core reasons misinformation about human trafficking persists. Because traffickers often exploit relationships and vulnerabilities rather than relying on overt force, the crime can be hard to detect, both for law enforcement and the general public. Moreover, invisibility is a constant reality for victims of crimes like human trafficking. Without hearing directly from victims, they stay unheard, which only helps the traffickers. Trust is important for any news source to be reputable. Outlets must gain trust, and as trust is gained, victims are increasingly able to come forward with their own stories.
Lastly, how can media literacy help communities better recognize real warning signs rather than myths?
Media literacy is all about recognizing the signs of misinformation and disinformation. Noticing these signs helps the everyday person dig deeper into what they're seeing. This healthy suspicion keeps people wary of false information and lets people dispel rumors with actual facts. It also encourages deeper engagement with trafficking coverage, asking whether a story represents different forms of exploitation and whether survivor voices are centered responsibly. This discernment only leads to more informed audiences, but also fosters safer, more supportive environments for survivors.
And that's what is true. With Media Literacy Coordinator Walker Scott. You can always learn more about the program or submit a question of your own at r8cjcnews.com/WITREQ or by calling 601-266, that's 601-266-8783. If you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, there is help available. The National Human Trafficking Hotline provides free, confidential support for victims and survivors of trafficking. Services are available 24/7 in English and Spanish. Call 888-373-7888 or text info to 233-733. And today's episode was adapted from our R8CJC news story, From Trust to Trafficking. Mississippi survivor shares story of being an invisible victim. A special thanks to the team behind the story, videographer Samin Chan, and of course reporter Morgan Gill, whom we heard from earlier in the show. You can read the full story and explore related reporting at r8cjcnews.com. As always, be sure to follow us on social media at R8CJC News to keep up with more stories just like this one. I want to thank you again for listening and for spending time with us as we take you behind the scenes of the Roy Howard Community Journalism Center. I'm Hilawe Tibebe, and this is Matter of Fact.